The temperature had dropped to 18 below zero. The mountain highway was gone, swallowed completely by white. And somewhere beneath 7 feet of compacted snow, a woman was running out of seconds. He was just a mechanic, a widower. A father who packed his daughter's lunch every morning and fixed broken machines for a living. But when the storm screamed and no one else was coming, he moved. And what happened next on that frozen Colorado mountain will stay with you long after this story ends. If stories like this move you, the kind that remind you what courage actually looks like, please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I read every single one. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The morning started the way most mornings did in Creston Falls, Colorado, with the smell of burnt coffee and a 7-year-old girl who could not find one of her boots. "Dad." Lily's voice carried through the small cabin like she was trying to be heard across a football field. "Dad, it's the brown one. Not the black one. The brown one." Ethan Cross stood at the kitchen counter, spatula in hand, staring at scrambled eggs he was about to ruin for the third morning in a row. He turned around. The brown boot was sitting directly behind his daughter's left foot. "Lily." "What?" "Turn around." She turned around, found the boot, held it up like she'd discovered buried treasure, and gave him a look that said, "Well, that wasn't so hard, was it?" He didn't smile. Not right away. He made himself wait 2 full seconds before the corner of his mouth gave him away. "Eat first," he said. "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway." She sat down at the table with the particular theatrical exhaustion that only 8-year-olds can perform, the kind that suggests breakfast is a form of persecution. Ethan set the eggs in front of her, poured himself a mug of coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long, and looked out the window above the sink. The sky had turned the color of old pewter sometime before dawn. The pine trees along the eastern ridge were barely visible through the haze. The National Weather Service had issued a winter storm warning the previous evening, the kind written in capital letters with phrases like life-threatening and do not travel. And Ethan had checked it twice before bed, not because he was worried about himself, but because of the highway. Highway 9 ran along the base of the mountain 11 miles from his property. A single lane in each direction. No guardrails on the southern section. Nothing between the asphalt and a 500-foot drop except a few reflector posts that had been knocked crooked by trucks the previous winter. He'd pulled people off that road twice in 7 years. Once a family from Texas who had no idea their all-season tires were worthless above 8,000 feet elevation. Once an elderly man from Iowa whose car had slid sideways into a drainage culvert and stayed there. Both times the man had walked away from what he was doing without thinking about it much. You see a problem, you fix it. That's just how things worked. Lily ate 4 bites of scrambled eggs, announced they were actually pretty good, and carried her plate to the sink without being asked. It was the small victories that got you through. Ethan had learned that, slowly, in the years after the funeral. You stopped waiting for the large ones. He drove her to school in the truck, the old Dodge that he kept running on stubbornness and mechanical knowledge, and the occasional part ordered from a salvage yard in Pueblo. Lily talked for most of the drive, something about a science project involving volcanoes, and something else about a girl named Penelope who had been annoying during recess. And Ethan listened with the careful attention he gave to everything, the kind of listening that meant he actually heard it. Not just the words, the small hesitations underneath the words. "Is Penelope a friend?" he asked. "She's annoying." "Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Lily looked at him sideways. "What does mutually exclusive mean?" "They can both be true at the same time." She considered this with genuine seriousness. "Then maybe," she said finally. He dropped her at the school entrance, watched her disappear through the double doors with her backpack riding too high on her small shoulders, the way it always did, and sat in the parking lot for a moment with the engine running. Margaret had been the one who bought that backpack. 2 years ago, before the diagnosis, when Lily was just starting first grade and everything about the future still felt like something they could plan for. He put the truck in reverse and went to work. The garage sat on this edge of Creston Falls' only commercial strip, wedged between a feed store and a small engine repair shop that had been going out of business for as long as anyone could remember. Ethan leased the bay and the attached office from a man named Harold Briggs, who lived in Denver and called twice a year to make sure the building was still standing. The sign above the door read, Cross Mechanical, in letters that had been faded by 2 brutal Rocky Mountain summers. He thought about repainting it, kept not getting around to it. He had 2 jobs waiting that morning, a plow truck that needed new cutting-edge blades, and a county maintenance vehicle with a hydraulic problem that had been nagging him since November. He put on his coveralls, poured the rest of the thermos into a paper cup, and got underneath the plow truck without turning on the radio. He preferred silence. Not because he was antisocial. He'd been told he came across that way more than once by more than one person. But silence was something he understood in his body, something that still felt like discipline after all these years. In the teams, silence meant you were paying attention. Noise was for people who weren't. He'd spent 11 years paying that kind of attention. SEAL Team 4, then Team 6. Deployments he couldn't name in countries that officially didn't involve American operators. He had a box in the back of the closet that held the things he'd received in recognition of what he'd done on those deployments. He kept the lid closed. He didn't take them out on Veterans Day or any other day. They belonged to a version of himself that no longer existed, a man who had made peace with the possibility of dying for strangers in foreign darkness and called it a life. Then Margaret got sick, and dying for strangers suddenly stopped making any kind of sense. He'd put in his papers, separated honorably, and driven straight to Colorado because Margaret had always said it was the only place in the country that felt like the world hadn't been completely ruined yet. He'd taken the first job he could get and learned a new trade with the same methodical patience he'd applied to everything else. Turned out mechanical work wasn't so different from field work. You diagnosed the problem. You found the broken part. You fixed it without making it worse. The hydraulic issue on the county truck was a failing seal on the lift cylinder, exactly where he'd suspected. He was sourcing the replacement part on his phone when the weather alert came through. He looked at the screen. Read it twice. Blizzard warning in effect beginning 1400 HRS. Total snowfall accumulation 36 to 48 inches. Winds gusting to 65 mph. Highway 9 mountain corridor. Dangerous to impassable conditions expected by 1600 HRS. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:47 in the morning. He thought about the southern section of Highway 9 for a moment, the place with no guardrails, the place where the road curved blind and you couldn't see what was coming until you were already in it. Then he went back to work. By early afternoon, the sky had done everything it promised. The clouds came in low and fast. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 3 hours, and the first serious bands of snow hit Creston Falls just after 1 o'clock. By 2, it was coming sideways. Ethan closed the garage early, secured the bay doors against the wind, and drove to the school to pick up Lily. They made a list on the drive home. Canned goods, firewood stacked, generator fuel topped off. The second kerosene heater moved from the shed into the mudroom. Lily had stopped objecting to these preparations years ago. She'd grown up watching her father treat emergencies the way other people treated errands, seriously, efficiently, without drama. She helped him stack wood without being asked, and made hot chocolate afterward that was more sugar than cocoa, and brought him a mug while he checked the perimeter of the property. "Is it going to be bad?" she asked. "Yep." "How bad?" "Stay inside bad." She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the wall of white coming down the north slope. "Okay," she said simply. That was Lily. She trusted his read on things. He wasn't sure he deserved that trust entirely, but he was grateful for it. He got her settled with dinner and homework, told her he was going to run a quick check on the road access and would be back in 40 minutes, and drove out into it. I wasn't sure, later, why he went south instead of north. South took him toward Highway 9. North took him toward town. It wasn't a decision he made consciously, more like something in his nervous system that had never fully stood down from its old training, the part that scanned for problems without being told to. The visibility was down to 50 yards by the time he turned onto the highway approach. His headlights caught nothing but spiraling white, the road surface completely invisible beneath the accumulated snow. He had chains on the rear axle and knew exactly how to read the terrain beneath the truck by feel, by the small shifts in resistance that told you where solid ground ended and where it didn't. That knowledge was not mechanical. It came from somewhere older than the garage. He almost turned back. He was 40 yards past the bend in the road, the blind curve section, when the headlights caught something in the wrong place. The shape was wrong, too angular, too dark against the white on the southern embankment. He stopped the truck, left it running, got out. The wind was doing about 45 miles an hour in the open stretch, and it hit him full in the face the moment he stepped out, the kind of cold that gets inside your sinuses immediately and makes your eyes water. He didn't break stride. He walked toward the shape with his flashlight and his head down against the wind. It was an SUV, a large one, black, high-end, the kind of vehicle that costs more than his garage lease for the year. It had gone through the shallow barrier on the road edge and was buried nose down in the embankment. The front end dropped at roughly a 40-degree angle into compacted snow, the rear wheels still partially on the road surface. The impact had likely been high speed relative to the conditions. Someone who hadn't understood what they were driving into until they were already in it. He hit the driver's window with his flashlight. No response. He hit it again, harder. Still nothing. He tried the door handle, locked or jammed by the impact. He couldn't tell. He cleared the snow from the window with his forearm and pressed his flashlight against the glass. A woman. Early 30s, roughly. Dark hair. Head resting against the side window at an angle that wasn't right. A thin line of dark color at her temple that he recognized immediately and that made him move faster. The rear door had a smaller impact zone and the frame was slightly less compressed. He got a foot planted against the lower panel for leverage, grabbed the handle, and put everything he had into it. The door resisted for a full 3 seconds, ice in the seals, frame distortion, and then surrendered with a sound like a gunshot. The interior was already cold. The vehicle had been here longer than he'd hoped, 20 minutes at minimum, possibly 30. He got inside, checked her neck for a pulse, found it. Strong enough. Irregular. She had a cut above her left ear from the window impact. Not deep enough to be the primary problem, but a cut like that in this temperature needed to stop bleeding. He took off his outer flannel without thinking about it and pressed it against the wound with her own hand, guiding her fingers there even unconscious because sometimes the body responds to pressure before the mind does. "Hey," he said. Not loudly, just at a normal register, directed at her ear. "I've got you. You're going to be okay. Can you hear me?" Her eyelids moved. Not full consciousness. But somewhere in there something heard him. He made a fast assessment. No visible spinal injury that he could identify. Her neck was at a natural angle and her color wasn't alarming. Possible concussion from the window impact. Possible hypothermia onset if she'd been here long. Her coat was good quality, but the heater was off, and the outside temperature was sitting at somewhere around 12 degrees Fahrenheit. He couldn't wait for an ambulance. Even if emergency services were operating, and in this storm, on this road, that was not a certainty, response time would be north of an hour. She didn't have an hour. He got his arms under her. She was light, not small, but not heavy. And he got her out of the vehicle in 2 careful movements, keeping her head supported, moving fast without rushing. She made a sound when he lifted her, not words, just the involuntary sound of a body in pain responding to movement. "I know," he said. "Almost there." He carried her to the truck. The drive back to the cabin took 11 minutes that felt longer. She stayed semi-conscious, in and out, her head moving occasionally, once a brief, confused attempt to sit upright that he stopped with a firm hand on her shoulder and a calm, flat "stay still" that she obeyed without fully waking. Lily was reading on the couch when he came through the door carrying a stranger. To her credit, she took it remarkably well. There was a brief moment of wide eyes, and then she was on her feet. "Get me the first aid kit," he said. "Under the bathroom sink, green bag." "Is she—" "She's okay." "Green bag, Lily. Go." Lily went. He got the woman onto the couch, elevated her legs on the folded sleeping bag he kept in the hall closet, and had the wound cleaned and bandaged by the time Lily reappeared with the kit. The bleeding had slowed significantly. Scalp wounds always looked worse than they were, all that surface circulation. And her color was improving slightly with the warmth. He checked her pupils. Unequal, left slightly larger than right. He sat back on his heels and thought for a moment. Concussion, almost certainly. Possible mild intracranial pressure, which he could not treat and could not monitor with the equipment he had. What he could do was keep her warm, keep her hydrated when she was conscious enough to drink, keep her awake at intervals through the night, and watch for the signs that would tell him things were getting worse rather than better. He'd done more with less. More than once. Lily came and stood next to him, looking at the stranger on the couch. The woman was in her early 30s, Ethan could see now in the lamplight. Fine-boned face, expensive haircut, the kind of manicured hands that said she worked indoors. Her coat alone probably cost $400. "Who is she?" Lily asked. "Don't know yet." "Is she going to stay here?" Ethan looked at the window. The snow was coming so thick and fast now that the porch light was barely visible. Somewhere out in that white nothing, the road had ceased to exist. "For a while," he said. He went through her coat pockets carefully, not looking for anything in particular, just the information a responsible person would need. He found a phone with a cracked screen, dead. A business card holder with her name embossed in clean sans serif type. Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Capital Group. He set it on the coffee table. It didn't change anything about the situation, didn't make it easier or harder. She was a person who needed help, and he was the only help available. That was the entire equation. He covered her with 2 blankets, put a folded towel under her head, and dragged his reading chair close enough that he could check her at regular intervals without crossing the room. "Go to bed, Lily," he said. "Can I stay up a little?" "Bed." She went, but slowly, with multiple backward glances. At the doorway, she stopped. "Dad." "Yeah." "You went out in the storm to find her?" "I went out to check the road." "But you found her." He looked at his daughter for a moment. She was watching him with the same expression she sometimes wore when she was working through something she didn't have language for yet. "Go to sleep," he said quietly. She did. Ethan Cross settled into his chair, pulled it a few inches closer to the woman on the couch, and listened to the blizzard press itself against every wall of the cabin like something that wanted in. Victoria Sterling breathed. The fire held. The night got long and cold and stayed that way for a long time. He didn't sleep. He never slept when there was a problem he hadn't solved yet. Old habits. She came back to herself in pieces. The first thing Victoria Sterling was aware of was warmth. The heavy blanketed kind that meant she was no longer outside, no longer in the car, no longer in the white. Nothing that had swallowed the road and everything on it. The second thing was pain. A dull, insistent pressure behind her left ear that pulsed with her heartbeat and made thinking feel like work. The third thing was the smell of wood smoke and old coffee and something like pine resin, and underneath all of that, the particular quietness of a space that belonged to someone who lived alone and had stopped noticing the silence. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was rough-hewn timber, the kind that came from actual trees rather than a lumberyard. The gaps between the beams chinked with something pale. A fire was burning somewhere to her left. She could hear it, the low, irregular pop and breath of real wood burning, not gas. She tried to sit up. "Don't." The voice came from her right, flat and calm and not unkind. She turned her head, carefully, because the pain flared immediately when she moved, and found a man sitting in a wooden chair close enough to reach her without standing up. Big. Not the kind of big that announced itself. More the functional kind, the kind distributed through a frame that looked like it had been used hard for a long time. He was probably late 30s, dark hair going slightly gray at the temples, a jaw that needed shaving, eyes that were watching her the way you'd watch a gauge on a piece of equipment, steady, patient, looking for information. "You have a concussion," he said. "Moving too fast is going to make it worse." "Where?" She stopped. Her voice came out wrong, thin and unused. "You're in my cabin, about 12 miles north of Highway 9. He leaned forward slightly in the chair, elbows on his knees. "Your car went off the road on the South Bend. I found you and brought you here. My name is Ethan Cross." She processed this. It took a second longer than it should have, which told her the concussion was real and not minor. "Victoria Sterling," she said. "I know, found your card." She looked at the room around her. It was small but not cramped. A main living space with the couch she was lying on, the fireplace, a kitchen visible through a low doorway, a narrow hall beyond that. The walls held a few things: a child's drawing in crayon, framed, a topographic map of the county, a photograph she couldn't see clearly from this angle. No television. Bookshelves on the far wall, actual books. a mixture of paperbacks and hardcovers with broken spines that meant they'd been read. "My phone," she said. "Screen's cracked and the battery's dead. I've got a landline, but the line's been down since about 8 o'clock last night." She looked at the window. The glass was almost completely white, not frost, snow, pressed flat against the outside of the pane by wind pressure. "What time is it?" 7:40 in the morning. She'd been unconscious for... She tried to calculate, and the calculation slipped away from her. "How long was I..." "You came around a few times in the night. You probably don't remember it." He stood, moved to the kitchen with the same unhurried efficiency he seemed to bring to everything, and came back with a glass of water and 2 white tablets that he set on the coffee table within her reach. "Ibuprofen. For the headache." She looked at the pills, then at him. There was something slightly ridiculous about being suspicious of a man who had clearly already kept her alive through the night, but the instinct was still there, the urban professional's habitual wariness of strangers. He read it on her face. "They came out of a bottle with a pharmacy label on it," he said, without any particular irritation. "Take them or don't." She took them. He went back to the kitchen. She heard him moving things around, the particular sounds of a morning routine that didn't change because of company. The scrape of a pan, water running briefly, the low click of a burner catching. A door opened somewhere down the hall, and small footsteps came toward the living room and then stopped. Victoria turned her head and found a girl standing in the doorway to the hall, 8, maybe 9 years old. Dark hair like her father's, pulled into a ponytail that was coming apart on one side. She was wearing pajamas with a pattern Victoria couldn't quite make out, some kind of animal. And she was looking at the stranger on her family's couch with undisguised curiosity. "You're awake," the girl said. "I am." "Does your head hurt?" "Yes." The girl nodded, apparently satisfied that this confirmed something. "Dad said it would. He said you hit the window." She came a few steps further into the room. "I'm Lily." "Victoria. That's a really long name." "It is." "Dad calls you Sterling." Lily dropped onto the opposite end of the couch, pulling her feet up under her. "He does that with everyone, last names." Victoria glanced toward the kitchen. "Does he?" "He called my teacher Mrs. Howarth for like 6 months before he started calling her Susan, and she had to tell him to." Lily picked up a small throw pillow and held it against her chest. "Are you from Denver?" "New York, originally. My company's headquartered in Denver." "What does your company do?" "We invest in other companies, help them grow." Lily considered this with the same serious attention her father seemed to give everything. "Do you like it?" It was a child's question, simple, direct, no agenda behind it. And Victoria opened her mouth to give the automatic answer, the one she gave journalists and board members and people at charity dinners, the one about passion and building something meaningful. What came out instead was a shorter silence than she expected, and then, "Most days." Lily seemed to accept this as an honest answer. She stayed on the couch while her father cooked, asking questions at irregular intervals. Not demanding, just genuinely curious in the way children are before they learn that curiosity is supposed to be rationed. Victoria answered most of them. By the time Ethan appeared in the doorway to say breakfast was ready, she knew that Lily's favorite subject was science, that she had a best friend named Cora who lived 4 miles down the road, that she thought the best dinosaur was the ankylosaurus because, and this was delivered with great authority. It didn't need to be fast because it was basically a tank, and that she had never been to New York but had seen pictures and thought there were too many buildings too close together. "Lily," Ethan said from the doorway, "I was just talking." "Come eat." The girl unfolded herself from the couch and padded to the kitchen. Ethan lingered a moment in the doorway, looking at Victoria. "Can you sit up?" "I think so." He crossed the room, adjusted the pillows at her back, and helped her upright with the same matter-of-fact practicality he seemed to apply to everything. No performance of gallantry, no apology for the physical proximity, just the business of getting someone from one position to another without making it hurt more than necessary. He brought her a bowl of oatmeal and a mug of coffee and set them on the table within reach. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and went back to the kitchen. She ate slowly, listening to the muffled sounds of the storm outside and the quieter sounds of a father and daughter having breakfast in a small kitchen. Their conversation was the low, comfortable kind that comes from living in close quarters with someone. Half-finished sentences, references that needed no explanation. She caught fragments. Something about whether the generator was still running, something about a science test that had been scheduled for today and was now obviously not happening. "Does that mean I don't have to study?" Lily asked. "It means you study anyway. That's not how snow days work. It's how they work here." Victoria drank her coffee and looked at the window and thought about the meeting she was missing. The quarterly review with her executive team, she'd rescheduled it twice already, and Marcus Webb, her CFO, had been making the particular kind of patient, neutral noises that meant he was losing patience. The acquisition talks with the Portland firm were at a delicate enough stage that missing one meeting could be read as a signal. In the language of corporate negotiation, absence was always a message. She picked up her dead phone and looked at the cracked screen and put it back down. There was exactly nothing she could do about any of it. That was not a feeling she was accustomed to. The storm did not improve. By noon, the wind had climbed back above 50 miles an hour and was driving the snow in near horizontal sheets across the open ground between the tree line and the cabin. The temperature outside had dropped to 8 degrees. Ethan checked the roof 3 times before lunch, coming back inside each time with snow on his shoulders and a particular look on his face. Not worried exactly, but attentive in the way of someone running calculations. He'd gotten Victoria moved to the chair closest to the fireplace once she proved she could walk without the room tilting dangerously. Her balance was still off. The concussion made certain movements feel like the world had a slight delay, like the visual information arrived a half-second after the physical reality. But she could function. She'd been told, at various points in her life, that she had a high pain tolerance. She'd always taken that as a compliment. Sitting in Ethan Cross's wooden chair by a fire in the Colorado mountains with her head throbbing and no way to reach her office, she thought maybe it was less a compliment and more a description of a habit she'd mistaken for a strength. Ethan brought her more ibuprofen at 2 o'clock. He checked her pupils again, flashlight from his shirt pocket, a quick clinical sweep that he performed like someone who had done it before in contexts she suspected were not medical, and pronounced them better than this morning without being good yet. "You've done this before," she said. Not a question. "Done what?" "Checked someone for a concussion, like that." He put the flashlight back in his pocket. "Wilderness first aid, you pick it up." It was not a lie, exactly. She could tell that much. But it was not the whole answer. She let it sit. Lily had settled at the kitchen table with her school books, working through something mathematical with the focused irritation of someone who found the material insufficiently interesting. Occasionally, she would call out a question and Ethan would answer it from wherever he was in the cabin, checking the generator fuel, reinforcing the door seal, moving through the space with a quiet, systematic thoroughness that struck Victoria as unusual for a man described by the work clothes and the garage smell and the calluses on his hands as a mechanic. She watched him. She was good at watching people. It was in the end the skill that had built Sterling Capital, the ability to see what a person was actually doing underneath what they said they were doing. What she saw in Ethan Cross was a man who moved through space like he had mapped it first, not anxious, not cautious in the fearful sense, cautious the way a surgeon is cautious, economical, intentional, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned not to waste motion. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked when he came back through the living room. 7 years? And before that? He glanced at her, brief. "Military." "Which branch?" A beat. "Navy." She waited for the rest. It didn't come. He moved to the firewood stack and started adding a log, adjusting the arrangement with the poker in a way that improved the airflow without her being able to say exactly how she knew it was better. "I grew up in Connecticut," she said, not sure why she was offering it. "My father ran a hardware chain. Not a big one. Regional. I was the first person in my family to go to an Ivy League school." She paused. "My brother James said I was going to forget where I came from. He said it nicely. He usually did." Ethan set the poker down. He was still facing the fireplace. "Usually?" "He had his moments." She looked at the fire. "He died 4 years ago. Cardiac event. He was 41. She said it the way she always said it, factual, contained, the way you learn to say it when you've said it enough times to sand off the rough edges. "He was the other half of the company. We built it together." Ethan turned around then. He didn't say he was sorry. She appreciated that more than she would have expected. She'd heard "I'm sorry" more times than she could count since James died, and it had never once made anything better. "Hard to lose a partner," he said. "Yes." He sat down in the chair across from her. It seemed like a decision, not an accident, like he'd been standing by the fireplace for a reason and had now decided to sit for a different reason. He put his forearms on his knees and looked at the fire for a moment. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. "Cancer. She was 34. Victoria was quiet. Lily was 5. He looked at his hands. "She still sometimes talks about her like she's just out somewhere, coming back. I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I don't correct it when she does. I probably should. I don't know if that's the right call. I don't think there is a right call for something like that." "No." He rubbed the side of his face. "Probably not." They sat with it for a while. The fire popped. Outside, the wind found a new angle against the north wall, and the cabin answered with a low resonance in the timbers, the sound of a structure absorbing pressure and holding. "What was her name?" Victoria asked. "Margaret." He said it the way you say the name of someone you have said 10,000 times and still can't say casually. "She was a physical therapist. She was better with people than I am." The corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile. "Most people are better with people than I am. You've been perfectly decent with me. You were unconscious for most of it." She laughed. It surprised her, the genuine kind, not the polished professional laugh she deployed in boardrooms. It hurt her head, and she pressed 2 fingers to her temple and said, "Don't do that." And he looked at her with something in his eyes that might have been the early stages of amusement. The afternoon went slowly and not unpleasantly, which Victoria had not expected. Lily finished her math and brought it to her father for checking and argued, without much conviction, about 2 of the problems he marked wrong and then went back and redid them correctly. After that, she came to sit near Victoria again and asked if she'd ever been on an airplane, which led to a conversation about cities, which led somehow to a conversation about animals. Victoria had seen while traveling a specific memory of a group of wild horses in a field outside of Billings, Montana, during a trip she'd taken for a potential acquisition. And Lily listened to this with her chin propped on her fists and her eyes focused in the way of someone building an internal picture. "Were they really wild?" she asked. "They weren't fenced. They were just there." "Did they look at you?" "One of them did. For a while." Lily seemed to find this satisfying. Ethan made dinner from what he had: canned chili that he improved with dried spices from the cabinet, cornbread from a mix. The kind of functional cooking that was about fuel rather than pleasure, but that managed, through some alchemy of spice and timing, to be genuinely good. Victoria said so, and he accepted it with a single nod in the same way he seemed to accept most things, without flourish. After dinner, Lily was sent to bed earlier than usual on the grounds that the storm might require early work in the morning, and everyone needed their sleep. She went with moderate protest, pausing at Victoria's chair on the way past to say, "I hope your head feels better," with enough sincerity that it landed somewhere softer than Victoria had been expecting. When her footsteps faded down the hall, Ethan got up and added more wood to the fire and remained standing, looking at the window. "The roof's holding more weight than I'd like," he said. "How much more?" "I don't know yet. The accumulation rate slowed a little in the last hour. If it slows more overnight, we're okay." Victoria looked up at the ceiling. The timber above her looked solid. She knew, in the abstract way of a person who has never lived anywhere, that snow was a structural threat, that this was a real concern. But the knowing was intellectual rather than physical. She didn't feel it in her gut the way she suspected Ethan did. "Does this happen often?" "Not this bad." He turned away from the window. "I should have pulled more snow off the north side earlier. I made a call and it might have been the wrong one." She looked at him. He'd said it without the defensive inflection that most people put on admissions like that. Not, "I had reasons," or "I couldn't have known," just a clean acknowledgement of a decision that might have been an error. She found it unusual enough to be worth noting. "You blame yourself a lot," she said. He glanced at her. "What makes you say that?" "The way you said that, about the roof. And earlier, when you talked about your wife, you said you should have been there more. You said it like it was a fact." His jaw moved slightly. "She got sick while I was deployed. She didn't tell me how bad it was until I got back. By then—" He stopped. I should have been paying closer attention. To what? You were in another country. You can always pay more attention. She studied him for a moment. That's a very exhausting way to live. Yeah. He picked up the poker again, not because the fire needed it, she suspected, but because it gave his hands something to do. Probably. My therapist told me I do the same thing, she said, with James. She said I keep looking for the moment where I could have intervened. Some phone call I could have made, some conversation about his health that I didn't push hard enough on. She looked at the fire. She's probably right. I haven't stopped looking. Do you still see her, the therapist? No, I got busy. She paused. That's what I told myself. Ethan set the poker down again. He looked at her with that steady, assessing look. Not unkind, not clinical, just the look of someone paying real attention. And then he said, she was probably right about the looking. I know. Doesn't stop it, though. No, Victoria said. It doesn't. The wind hit the north wall again, harder this time, and both of them felt the change in the cabin's sound. The timbers taking on a different note, higher, more compressed. Ethan looked at the ceiling. I'm going up, he said. On the roof? Just to check. He was already pulling his coat from the hook by the door. Don't move around too much while I'm out. Your balance isn't reliable yet. I'll stay exactly here. You don't strike me as someone who stays exactly anywhere. She opened her mouth to object to this and found she couldn't because it was simply accurate. He pulled on his boots with quick practiced movements and went out through the front door into the storm, taking the flashlight from his shirt pocket as he went. And the cold poured briefly into the cabin before the door closed and the warmth reasserted itself. Victoria sat alone in the firelight and listened to the wind and distantly to the sound of footsteps on the roof. Heavy, deliberate, moving with the careful weight distribution of someone who knew exactly where to put his feet on a snow-loaded surface in the dark. She thought about James, about the last conversation they'd had in his office, arguing about the Portland acquisition, both of them too tired and too caffeinated and too convinced the other one was wrong. She'd been right about the acquisition. She still wished she'd lost the argument. The footsteps crossed the roof above her, paused, continued. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and watched the fire and let the cabin hold against the storm and thought that she could not remember the last time she had sat still long enough to actually feel how tired she was. It had been a long time. Longer than 4 years. Longer than she'd admitted to anyone, including the therapist she'd gotten too busy to keep seeing. Ethan came back inside 40 minutes later with snow on his coat and a look that she was learning to read. Not the neutral one he wore when things were fine, not quite, but not the tight one she'd seen briefly when he'd been calculating the roof load before dinner. How bad? She asked. I pulled about 300 pounds of snow off the north face. He hung up his coat and stood in the entryway, knocking the snow from his boots. It bought us margin. The question is how much accumulates overnight. What's the forecast? My radio says the main band should push east by morning. If it does, we're fine. He paused. If it doesn't, then what? He came into the main room and looked at the north wall. Then we moved to contingency. Which is? He looked at her. One thing at a time. She wanted to push back on that. She was a person who needed complete information, always, all the variables on the table. But she was also tired in a way the concussion had turned into something almost physical, a heaviness in her skull that made argument feel expensive. All right, she said. He looked slightly surprised. She suspected he'd been prepared for more resistance. I'll take the floor out here, he said. In case anything shifts in the night, you'll stay on the couch. Call me if the sound changes. The sound? The roof. If the tone changes, gets lower, more stressed, wake me up. How will I know the difference? You'll know. He said it with a certainty she was starting to recognize as something other than arrogance. More like the flat confidence of someone who has found that most things, paid close enough attention to, will tell you what you need to hear. He got a sleeping bag from the hall closet and unrolled it on the floor between the couch and the fireplace. The domesticity of it was strange. A woman she'd describe as one of Denver's most prominent executives, lying on a near stranger's couch with a bandage on her head, watching him make a bed on the floor of his cabin while a blizzard pressed in from all sides and his daughter slept 20 feet away. Strange, but not frightening. She noticed that. She was not frightened. She wasn't sure if that was good judgment or the concussion. "Ethan," she said. He looked up from the sleeping bag. "Thank you for going out in that tonight." She meant the roof, but also the road, also the previous evening, also the thing he'd done that she couldn't see directly but could feel in the edges of the particular way he'd been watching the situation from the moment she arrived, tracking variables she wasn't even aware of. "I don't think I've said it clearly enough." He considered this for a moment with the same seriousness he brought to practical things, and then he said, "You didn't have to say it at all." She wasn't sure if that was modesty or something else. She thought it might be something else. She lay back on the couch and pulled the blanket to her chin and listened to the storm and the fire and the slow, regular rhythm of a man who did not sleep so much as stand watch. And she was unconscious before she had fully made the decision to close her eyes. Above them, the roof held. For now, she woke to a sound she didn't recognize. Not the storm. She'd grown accustomed to the storm over the past 36 hours, learned its rhythms the way you learn the sounds of a new building, the particular vocabulary of wind against these walls and snow against these windows. This was different. Lower. A compression sound, like something massive settling under weight it had been holding too long. She sat up. The fire had burned down to coals that still threw enough light to see by, barely. The sleeping bag on the floor was empty. Ethan was already standing at the far end of the room, flashlight in hand, looking at the north wall. His posture told her everything before he said a word. Shoulders forward, weight balanced, the particular stillness of a man who is not frozen, but coiled. "What was that?" she asked. "Get up," he said, slowly. "Come toward me." She got to her feet. The concussion had improved overnight. The heaviness behind her eye was duller this morning, the balance less unreliable. And she crossed the room without the room tilting. She stopped at his shoulder. He had the flashlight angled at the junction of the north wall and the ceiling. In the pale beam she could see it, a crack that had not been there the previous evening. Not wide, maybe a quarter inch at its widest point, but running the length of the beam above the north window, and at one end, where the beam met the wall plate, a downward bow that was subtle enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. "That's new," she said. "Yes." "How bad?" He moved the flashlight slowly along the beam. "The joint at the northeast corner has failed. The beam's transferring load to the wall plate, and the plate is starting to move." He said it the way he said most things, without editorializing, just the information. "The section above the north wall is the problem. If the load shifts fast..." A second sound, sharper. Not a settling, a crack, clean and sudden, from somewhere above and to their left. Then a groan that came through the timber itself, vibrating into the floor under their feet. "Lily," Victoria said. He was already moving. He went down the hall in 4 long strides, and she followed, and she heard him hit Lily's door and push through it, and she got there 2 seconds behind him. Lily was sitting up in bed, wide-eyed, the alarm on her face not yet panic, but right at the edge of it. "Dad! On your feet. Bring the blanket." He had her up before the sentence was done, his hand on her back, moving her toward the doorway. He looked at Victoria. "The southeast corner, the interior angle. Go." She went. The southeast corner of the cabin was the farthest point from the north wall, a 90-degree interior angle where the bookshelves met the kitchen partition. Solid corner, the kind of structural point where 2 walls supported each other, where the load paths were shortest and most direct. She understood this not because she knew construction, but because his voice had the tone of someone who had already analyzed the geometry and was giving her the result. They got to the corner. Ethan pulled the heavy bookshelf out at an angle, creating a partial overhang, not much, but a few inches of additional coverage from above, and put Lily in the space between the shelf and the wall with the blanket around her shoulders. "Stay there," he told her. "Dad, what's happening?" "The north section of the roof is coming down. You're safe where you are. Do not move from that spot regardless of what you hear. Do you understand me?" Lily looked at him. She was frightened. Victoria could see it in her eyes, that particular childhood terror that is partly about the immediate danger and partly about seeing your parent move with an urgency they usually conceal. But she was also her father's daughter. She nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. He turned back to the room. It came down 30 seconds later. The north section of the roof did not collapse all at once. It was not the movie version, a sudden catastrophic implosion. It was worse, in some ways, because it happened in stages. First, the northeast beam gave a sound like a rifle shot that made all three of them flinch simultaneously. Then the wall plate above the north window shifted outward 6 inches, and the ceiling above it sagged visibly, the rough plaster cracking in a long diagonal line. Then, in the 3 seconds between that and the next failure, a section of roof timber, insulation, and approximately 400 pounds of compacted snow broke through the ceiling above the north side of the living room and came down in a cascading collapse that took the north window, the wood stack beside it, and the left arm of the couch with it. The sound was enormous and brief. Then there was the hiss of snow spreading across the floor, the creak of stressed wood finding new equilibrium, and a cold so immediate and aggressive it felt like a physical blow. The outside temperature pouring through the new opening in the wall where the window had been. Lily made a sound from the corner. Not a scream. A short, compressed sound that was worse than a scream. "I'm here," Ethan said immediately, without raising his voice. "I'm right here. Don't move." Victoria was pressed against the kitchen partition, 2 feet from where she'd been standing when the sound started. Her heart was going very fast. She made herself take one full breath before she looked at the damage. The north third of the living room was gone. Not entirely. The floor was intact, the debris had landed mostly on itself, and the remaining 2/3 of the ceiling were holding. But the wall had a 3-foot gap where the window had been, open to the outside, and through it the blizzard was already entering with complete indifference to what had just happened. Ethan moved into the debris with the flashlight. She watched him step over fallen timber, test the floor at 2 points with his weight before committing to it, examine the edge of the remaining ceiling with the light. He was looking at something above the debris pile. The breakpoint in the beam, she realized, checking whether the remaining section was stable or whether there was more weight shifting. "The main ridge beam is intact," he said, mostly to himself. Then louder, "The rest of it's going to hold. The failure isolated to the north section." "Are you sure?" "The ridge beam is the spine. As long as it's not compromised, the other sections are independent." He came back across the floor. "I need to close that opening." "With what?" He was already in the hall. She heard the utility closet open, heard the sound of things being moved, and he came back with a roll of heavy plastic sheeting and a staple gun. The practical kind of thing that a man living alone on a Colorado mountainside in winter keeps on hand because the alternative is being unprepared. And being unprepared was apparently not something Ethan Cross did. "Hold this end," he told her. They sealed the gap in 4 minutes. Not perfectly. The plastic sheeting billowed inward with each wind gust, and the seal along the broken wall edge leaked cold air in a thin, steady stream. But it stopped the main ingress, and the temperature in the remaining portion of the cabin stopped its immediate free fall. He built the fire back up from coals to a real burn in the time it took her hands to stop shaking. She didn't mention the hands. She stood near the fireplace and watched him work, and thought about what he'd done in the 90 seconds between the first crack and the collapse. The speed of the calculation, the precision of the instructions, the complete absence of the kind of panic that would have been entirely understandable and would have made everything worse. Lily came out from the corner when he told her it was safe, blankets still around her shoulders, picking her way through the debris with careful feet. She went straight to her father, and he put his arm around her, and she pressed her face into his side, and he held her there without comment for a long moment. "The couch is wrecked," she said finally, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Yep." "Was that one or the new one?" "Old one." "Okay." She pulled back and looked at the damage with what Victoria was beginning to recognize as the cross-family default expression when confronting disaster. The taking stock look, assessing rather than mourning. "Where do we sleep?" "Floor close to the fire. We've got the sleeping bags and the camping mats." "That's actually kind of fine," Lily said, in the tone of someone willing herself to mean it. He squeezed her shoulder. "Go get the mats from the hall closet, both of them." She went. Ethan stood where he was for a moment, looking at the plastic sheeting, and Victoria saw something cross his face that he didn't fully suppress. Not fear, not the panic he'd successfully contained through the emergency, but something that came after. The specific exhaustion of a person who has held everything together through an acute crisis and is now, briefly, in the 1-second gap before the next task, aware of how much holding it cost. Then it was gone. He turned back to the room and started moving debris off the floor, clearing the usable space. "Ethan," she said, The temperature in here will stabilize in about 20 minutes once the fire's up. The plastic won't be sufficient long term, but it'll hold through. Ethan. He stopped. Stop moving for a second. He looked at her. In the firelight, with debris at his feet and the improvised window behind him and his daughter's boots audible in the hallway, he looked exactly like what he was. A man holding a very complicated situation together with the tools available and not a lot of margin for error. I'm fine, he said. Automatic. I didn't say you weren't. She held his gaze. I just want you to stop moving for 1 second. He stopped. He took a breath. He looked at the fire. That was close, he said, quietly. The timing of getting Lily out. We got her out. 30 seconds earlier and she'd have been in the hall, not in the corner. If I hadn't been awake. He stopped. I keep running it. I know, Victoria said. I know you do. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Not the steady diagnostic attention he brought to physical problems, but something that was less guarded, less managed. The look of a person who is, for reasons they probably can't fully explain, allowing themselves to be actually seen. The roof section on the northwest side is borderline, he said. I don't think it goes tonight, but I don't know for certain. Then we deal with it, if it goes. I should have cleared more snow yesterday. You cleared 300 pounds in the dark in a 50-mile-an-hour wind, she said. In weather you told me yourself you'd never seen this bad. Stop counting what you didn't do. Something shifted in his face. She couldn't have said precisely what. Lily came back with the camping mats, one under each arm, and the moment, whatever it had been, folded itself back into the business of the evening. They arranged the sleeping area near the fireplace, Lily in the middle with adults on either side. An arrangement Lily accepted with a pragmatism that suggested she understood, at 8 years old, that this was not a night for preferences. They lay in the firelight and listened to the storm, and Lily fell asleep within 10 minutes with the absolute completeness that only children can manage after terror, entirely out, as if the fear had consumed the fuel and left nothing for wakefulness. Victoria lay on her side and stared at the coals and did not sleep. After a while she heard, from the other side of Lily's sleeping form, "You're not sleeping." "No." A pause. "Me neither." The fire shifted. Outside, the wind moved around the north side of the cabin and found the gap in the plastic sheeting and made a low, intermittent whistle that was almost musical. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "The way you moved tonight, when the roof came down." She chose her words carefully. Not accusatory, not flattering, just honest. That's not wilderness first aid. The way you read the structure. The way you got Lily into the right corner. The way you... all of it. That's something else. Silence from the other side of Lily. "I'm a mechanic," he said. "You're a mechanic the way I'm a girl from Connecticut," she said. Technically accurate and not the whole answer. More silence. She waited. She was good at waiting. Boardrooms had taught her that the person who breaks silence first is usually the person who needs something, and right now she was trying very hard not to need anything in the usual ways. "Navy?" he said finally. "I told you that." "You told me Navy. That's a big category." The fire popped. Lily's breathing stayed deep and regular between them. "SEAL teams," he said. 11 years. She'd thought something like it. The body knowledge, the way he used space, the specific kind of calm he carried into crisis. Not the calm of a person who isn't afraid, but the calm of a person who has been afraid so many times in such extreme conditions that fear has become simply another variable to account for. She'd known men in finance who had that quality, usually former military, and she'd always noticed it because it was so different from the manufactured confidence of people who had only ever succeeded. "Team 4 initially," he continued, in the flat, factual voice of someone reading from a document they've memorized. "Then reassigned to a DevGru element, development group. Most people know it as Team 6. He paused. 11 years, 9 deployments. I held a classification that I'm not going to go into. I'm not asking you to. I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I left when Margaret got sick, put in my papers inside of a week. The command tried to convince me to take leave instead. Told me I could come back, that operators at my level didn't just walk. I told them I appreciated the sentiment." He paused. "I didn't come back." "Do you regret it?" The answer came without hesitation. "No. Not ever." He said it with a finality that was not anger, just certainty. I regret the time I wasn't here. I don't regret leaving. She looked at the ceiling, the intact section, the part that had held. Every impossible thing you've done in the last 2 days, she said slowly. The car, the concussion assessment, the roof, the way you knew exactly where to put Lily. It all… She stopped. It wasn't luck. No. You've done things like this before, in the field. Different contexts, same problems mostly. How do you keep people alive when the situation is actively trying to kill them? He said it without any particular drama. It was just a description. Temperature, structure, injury, resource management. The math is similar. She was quiet for a moment, then, why didn't you tell me? It doesn't change anything about the situation. It changes how I understand you. I don't need you to understand me, he said. But he said it without sharpness, just with the particular bluntness of a man who meant exactly what he said and didn't dress it in softeners. No, she said. But I do. Silence again. Lily shifted in her sleep, one hand opening and closing once against the camping mat. Margaret knew, obviously, he said. Lily knows I was in the Navy. She knows I did things I can't tell her about yet. She says I was good at it. I don't know where she got that. I never told her the specifics. Kids figure things out. Yeah. A pause. She asked me once if I ever had to hurt anyone. I said sometimes that was part of the job. She thought about it for a while, and then she asked if I was sad about it. I said sometimes. He exhaled. She said that was the right answer, that if I wasn't sad about it at all, that would be bad. But if I was too sad about it, I wouldn't be able to do it. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. She was right. She was 7 when she said it. Still right. He made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been something harder to categorize. The hardest part, he said after a while, wasn't the deployments, wasn't the things I saw or the things I did. It was coming back. He was speaking slowly now, in the way of someone who rarely talks about a thing and is therefore still finding the language for it. Every time. The world over here looked wrong, too comfortable and too unaware. I couldn't explain to Margaret what it felt like to sit in a restaurant and watch people argue about the menu and feel like I'd just stepped off another planet. He stopped. She used to give me 3 days. Just let me be somewhere in between. Not asking me to be all the way back yet. She sounds like she understood you better than most people. She understood me better than I understood myself. He said it plainly, without sentimentality. She was patient in a way I've never been. I worked through things by moving. She worked through things by sitting with them. Lily got that from her, Victoria said. That quality of sitting still with things. He was silent for a moment. Yeah, he said, and the word was heavier than it should have been. She did. The fire had burned down to its second hour, the logs collapsing into the arrangement that generated sustained heat rather than flame. The cabin had reached a working temperature. Not comfortable exactly, but survivable, which in this context was the same thing. Victoria could no longer see her breath, which she was taking as a positive indicator. Can I tell you something? She said. All right. When you found me in the car, she stopped. Tried again. I don't remember it clearly, the concussion, and I was going in and out. But I remember a voice. Before I was fully conscious, very calm, very, not gentle exactly, certain, like there was no question about the outcome. She looked at the coals. I think I stopped being afraid because the voice wasn't afraid. He didn't say anything. I've worked with a lot of people, she said. Hired them, managed them, invested in them. You spend enough time evaluating people and you think you understand what competence looks like, what it actually feels like. She shook her head slightly. I didn't understand it until 2 days ago. Victoria, I'm not flattering you, she said. I know the difference, and you do too. I'm telling you something that's true. He was quiet for a long time. The wind moved against the plastic sheeting, and it billowed and settled. I spent 11 years being competent at things that don't transfer, he said finally. Not to regular life, not to being a father or a husband or a neighbor. I knew how to keep people alive in extremis. I didn't know how to be there for the everyday of it. I got better. Margaret taught me most of it, but I've always been, he paused, better in a crisis than not in one. Some people would say that's a good trade. Some people haven't watched their kid try to explain her day to someone who's still running threat assessments in his head while she talks. He said it without bitterness, just honesty. It took me a long time to learn how to actually listen to her. You listen to her. Now I do. It took work. Most things worth doing take work, she paused. That's not a small thing, Ethan. Learning to be present when presence doesn't come naturally. That's harder than the other thing. The other thing tried to kill me multiple times. I know, she said. And you're still here. She felt him look at her across the distance of Lily's sleeping body. Felt it the way you sometimes feel a physical thing that isn't physical. A shift in the attention in a room, the weight of someone's gaze. So are you, he said. She didn't answer that immediately, because the thing about that was that it was true in multiple registers. She was alive because he'd pulled her out of a car, which was one kind of survival. But there was the other kind, the slower kind, the kind she'd been not quite managing for 4 years in a large apartment in Denver, surrounded by success and quarterly reports, and the particular loneliness of a person who has structured their entire life around achievement and then achieved everything and found the room still empty. James used to say I was hiding inside the company, she said. He said I used it as an excuse not to deal with anything personal, that I'd made work into armor. She paused. He wasn't wrong. Smart man. Infuriatingly so, usually. She felt the tightness in her chest again. I'd give a lot to argue with him right now. Yeah. His voice was quiet. I know that feeling. They lay in the dark for a while without talking, and the storm pressed and the fire held, and somewhere in the space between them, Lily breathed with the uncomplicated steadiness of a child who trusts the adults to manage whatever comes. Outside, the wind was shifting. Not diminishing, not yet, but changing direction, moving from the north to the northwest, which Ethan had told her the previous day was a sign of the system moving east. She didn't know if that was still true or whether last night's roof section changed the calculus. She could ask him. She thought she might not. Ethan. Yeah. What you said before, about being better in a crisis than outside one. She turned onto her back and looked at the ceiling. I don't think that's the whole story. What makes you say that? The way you are with Lily. She said it carefully. That's not a man who only shows up for emergencies. That's a man who's been showing up every day for a long time. He didn't answer immediately. It took a while to figure out, he said eventually. It didn't come naturally. Most things worth doing don't. She could feel his slight pause at the callback. The corner of her mouth moved. Go to sleep, he said. Not unkind. You first. I don't sleep well. I know, she said. I heard you last night. On the roof, and before that. You barely slept at all. Someone needed to watch the situation. The situation is going to be here in the morning, whether you sleep or not. Probably. Definitely. She closed her eyes. The northwest wind is a good sign. You told me that. I said it was a possible sign. You were hedging. You think it's moving. He was quiet. You think we're going to be okay, she said. Another pause. Then, with the particular reluctance of a man who does not make promises he cannot guarantee, I think the odds improved. That's enough, she said. And because she was more exhausted than she'd been in years, and because the fire was holding, and because the man lying 6 feet away was the most honest person she'd encountered in longer than she could remember, and because for the first time in 4 years she was not performing anything for anyone, not competence, not grief, not strength, not the version of Victoria Sterling that existed for board meetings and investor calls, deeply. Without the dreams that usually found her. Above them, the northwest wind pushed the storm edge east by 3 degrees. It was not enough to call it over. Not yet. But it was a beginning, and sometimes, in the middle of the worst kind of night, in a damaged cabin on a Colorado mountainside with everything stripped down to the essential, a beginning was exactly enough. The helicopters came at 9:30 in the morning. Victoria heard them before she saw them, a distant mechanical thrum that cut through the residual wind in a way that was entirely different from anything the storm had produced. She was standing at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee, watching the light change across the snow-covered ridge, when the sound registered. She put the mug down and went to the front door and opened it, and stood on the porch in the cold that was still serious but no longer murderous, and looked south. 2 helicopters. Sheriff's Department markings on the nearer one, the other white with a red cross on the side. They were following the highway corridor up from the valley, moving slowly in the thin morning air, and they would reach the cabin in under 4 minutes. She stood on the porch and felt something she had not expected. Not relief, exactly. Something more complicated. The way you feel when a thing you've been bracing against finally stops, and your body doesn't immediately know what to do with the absence of pressure. Ethan came out behind her. He'd been on the roof since first light, clearing the accumulated overnight snow from the remaining sections with methodical efficiency, and he had the look of a man who had been working in the cold for several hours, red along the cheekbones, a line of dried sweat at his temple, a muscle near his jaw that was tighter than usual from the sustained physical effort. He looked at the helicopters, then at her. "That'll be the county search and rescue," he said. "They'll have gotten your vehicle registration off the plates once the road crew found the car." "How long do you think the car's been found?" "Since about 6 this morning, probably." That's when the county plows would have hit the south section. He looked at the helicopter's approach angle. "They'll need to land in the lower field. Ground's flat enough." He said it all practically, the way he said most things. And she watched him say it and thought about what it would look like from the outside. A man telling a woman the logistics of her departure with the same composure he brought to roof repairs and concussion assessments. Perfectly reasonable, entirely appropriate, completely maddening. "Lily's still asleep?" she asked. "She was 20 minutes ago." "Let her sleep a little longer." He looked at her. "The helicopter." "I know, I just—" She stopped. Looked at the field below the cabin, the white expanse of it unmarked by anything yet. "Give me 10 minutes before it becomes an official thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he went back inside and she heard him moving in the kitchen, and 2 minutes later he came back out with her coat and held it out. She took it, put it on. He leaned against the porch railing beside her without any particular ceremony, and they stood in the cold and watched the helicopters grow larger against the sky. "The northwest wall's going to need a full rebuild," he said. "I know. It's a 2-week job minimum, working alone, probably 3. "Don't work alone," she said. He looked at her sideways. "Hire someone," she said. "You don't have to do everything by yourself." He turned back to the field. "I usually do." "I know." She pulled her coat tighter. "That's what I'm saying." The helicopters were close enough now to read the sheriff's department number on the tail rotor of the nearer one. They started their approach to the lower field, the rotor wash kicking up snow in wide circles below them, and somewhere inside the cabin Lily's voice came through the walls. Startled awake by the sound, calling for her father. He pushed off the railing, stopped at the door, turned halfway back. "Victoria." "Yeah." "The last 2 days?" He stopped. Started again. "I'm not good at—" "I know," she said. "I was going to say something." "I know what you were going to say." She looked at him. "You don't have to say it." He stood in the doorway for a moment with the expression she'd learned to read, the one that meant he was running the gap between what he meant and what words could carry, finding as usual that the gap was wider than he'd like. Then Lily called again, louder this time, and he went inside. She stood on the porch for another 30 seconds and watched the helicopters touch down. The EMT from the medical helicopter was a woman named Reyes, who performed Victoria's concussion assessment with brisk efficiency and announced that she'd seen worse, and the important thing was rest and no screens for 72 hours, which made Victoria think briefly and humorlessly about the 72 hours of emails and missed calls waiting for her on the other end of this ride. The sheriff's deputy, a young man named Kowalski, who seemed genuinely relieved that she was upright and coherent, took her statement about the accident on Highway 9 in a small notebook while she sat on the cabin steps. She told him about the road conditions, the speed she'd been traveling, the way the curve had come up before she registered the ice. She did not tell him she'd been on a call with her CFO at the time, which was probably a detail she would need to disclose at some point, and was not going to disclose to Kowalski. Lily had materialized on the porch in her coat and boots, watching the helicopters with an expression of open fascination that she was trying, not entirely successfully, to make look casual. She stood close enough to her father that their arms were touching. "Have you ever been in a helicopter?" Victoria asked her. "No." Lily looked at the nearer one. "Are they loud inside?" "Very." "But still cool?" "Still cool." Lily nodded, filing this away. Ethan spoke briefly with the deputy about the cabin's structural status and the road condition on the approach. Practical information, offered without being asked. The habit of a man who understood that other people's operations ran on accurate intelligence. Kowalski wrote it down and thanked him, and Ethan nodded, and that was the extent of that interaction. Reyes came to stand near Victoria as they were preparing to leave. "We can transport you to County General for a full imaging workup," she said. "Given the mechanism of injury, a CT would be standard. I'll go to my own physician in Denver." Reyes gave her the look that medical professionals give people who prioritize convenience over protocol. "The head injury is a concussion that has been monitored attentively for 48 hours by someone with significant field medical training." Victoria looked at the deputy's helicopter. "I'll get the imaging done today, in Denver." Reyes let it go with the particular resignation of someone who cannot physically compel compliance and knows it. Victoria stood up from the steps. Her legs were solid. Her head ached at a level that was now a 4 rather than an 8, dull and manageable. She crossed the yard to where Ethan was standing near the corner of the cabin, looking at the damaged north wall with the plastic sheeting still visible above it, the temporary repair she'd watched him construct in the middle of the night with a staple gun and whatever materials were at hand. She stopped beside him. "I'm going to have someone call you," she said. He looked at her. "About the cabin repairs. I want to cover the cost." "No," he said, immediate and flat. "Ethan, you don't owe me anything. That's not what this is about." "Then what's it about?" She held his gaze. "You pulled me out of a car in a blizzard. You kept me alive for 2 days. You shielded me from a collapsing roof." She kept her voice even. "You're not going to talk me out of helping with the repair costs. I got you into the situation that damaged the roof. You got me out of the situation that would have killed me. Those aren't equivalent." She paused. "Let me do this. It won't fix anything important, but it's what I have." He looked at the wall. His jaw worked once. Contractor does the labor. Materials only. Contractor does whatever the contractor needs to do to make the cabin structurally sound. He looked like he wanted to argue further. He didn't. "Fine," he said, in the tone of a man conceding a point that cost him something. "Thank you." "You're stubborn," he said. "I've been told." Lily appeared between them, coat buttoned wrong, 2 buttons off, the whole front section misaligned in a way that would bother her eventually. And she looked up at Victoria with an expression that was trying to be okay with something and wasn't entirely succeeding. "Do you have to go now?" she asked. "The helicopter's waiting." Lily looked at her boots. "Okay." Victoria crouched down to her level, which made her head register mild protest that she ignored. "I'm going to come back," she said. Lily looked up. "You are?" "Yes." "When?" "I don't know exactly, but I will." Lily thought about this with the serious, evaluating attention she brought to things that mattered. "Do you promise?" Victoria had not made a promise she wasn't certain she could keep in a very long time. The habit of executive caution, never commit to an outcome you can't control. She looked at this child with her misaligned coat buttons and her father's eyes and the particular brand of hopefulness that tries very hard to look like it doesn't care. "Yes," she said. "I promise." Lily nodded once. Then, without any preamble, she stepped forward and hugged Victoria around the neck. Quick, fierce, with the uncomplicated wholeheartedness of a child who has decided something and acts on it without deliberation. Victoria held on for a moment longer than Lily had anticipated. When she stood up, Ethan was looking at a point somewhere past her left shoulder with the expression of a man who is keeping his face very carefully neutral and having to work at it. She turned toward the helicopter. 3 steps, then she stopped. She looked back at him. There were things she wanted to say. She was good with words in most contexts. Boardrooms, negotiations, presentations to investors who needed persuading. The words existed. She could feel the shape of them. But something about the way he was standing there, about the cabin behind him with its damaged wall and its temporary repair, about the years she could see in the lines around his eyes and the set of his jaw, made the polished version of those words feel dishonest. "Don't disappear," she said. He looked at her directly. "I live on a mountain in Colorado." "I know where you live," she said. "Don't disappear." A pause. "All right," he said. She got in the helicopter. "Yeah, Denver felt like a foreign country. She'd known it would be disorienting, the return to scale, to noise, to the particular density of a city after 4 days of a mountain cabin and a blizzard. What she hadn't anticipated was how long the disorientation would last. The first morning back in her apartment on the 14th floor. She stood at the window and looked at the downtown skyline in the 6 a.m. gray and felt something she couldn't immediately name. It took her a few minutes to identify it. Wrong was the word her brain kept offering. Not bad, just wrong. Like a shirt that fit perfectly before and has somehow changed dimensions. Her physician did the CT scan that afternoon and confirmed what she already knew. Concussion, no intracranial bleeding, rest and reduce screen time and come back in 2 weeks. She went from the imaging center directly to the Sterling Capital offices because there were things that genuinely could not wait, and spent 3 hours in back-to-back calls that her assistant had arranged with the apologetic efficiency that meant they'd been waiting a long time and were very professionally not saying so. Marcus Webb came into her office after the last call, closed the door, and sat down across from her desk. "You look terrible," he said. Marcus was 61 and had been with the company since James had hired him 12 years ago, which gave him a latitude he occasionally tested. "I had a car accident in a blizzard, and a roof fell on me," she said. "The roof was in the news coverage." "There was news coverage?" "Victoria, you're the CEO of a publicly traded company, and you went missing for 4 days in a historic blizzard. Of course there was news coverage." He studied her. "The stock dipped 2 points on day 2 and came back on day 3 when someone confirmed you were alive." She hadn't known that. She thought about what those 2 points represented in dollar terms and then, almost immediately, thought about something else. A man on a porch in the early morning cold, watching helicopters cross a white field, not saying the things he meant because he didn't have words that fit. "What did I miss?" she asked. Marcus took her through it methodically. The Portland acquisition talks had paused, which was actually not the worst outcome. The other party had used the time to revise their position in a direction that was more honest about their debt load. The quarterly review had been rescheduled for the following week. 2 board members had called to express concern, which in board member language meant they'd been monitoring the situation and were satisfied she'd survived. A 3rd board member had called to discuss succession planning, which in board member language meant something rather less friendly. "Ellison," she said. He was careful about how he framed it. "He's always careful." She leaned back in her chair. "What did he actually say?" He said that given the increased scrutiny on single point of failure leadership structures, this might be an appropriate time to revisit the executive succession framework. Marcus delivered this in the neutral tone he used when quoting people he found distasteful. "He was very concerned about your well-being, I'm sure. He asked twice whether you'd be taking any extended medical leave." She looked at the skyline through her office window. The city was doing what cities do in the late afternoon. The slow accumulation of lights as the day shifted toward evening, the particular amber quality of the light between buildings. She'd always found it beautiful in a way she'd never quite had time to actually stop and look at. "Victoria," Marcus said, "I'm fine." "I know you're fine. That's not what I'm saying." She looked at him. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone choosing words carefully. "You've been running at 110% for 4 years," he said, "since James. Some of that was grief. Some of it was the company genuinely needing it. Some of it—" he paused. "Some of it was filling space." She should have deflected. She had the deflection ready, the polished version about strategic priorities and fiduciary responsibility. She didn't use it. "What are you suggesting?" she said. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what I observe." He folded his hands on his knee. "You're the best leader this company has ever had, including James, and I say that as someone who loved James. But you are not this company. You know that." She said nothing. "The acquisition talks can wait 3 weeks," he said. "I can run the quarterly review. Ellison is going to do what Ellison's going to do, and the board will manage it the way the board manages things." He stood up. "Take your 72 hours of no screens and actually take them." He left. She sat in her office for a while after he was gone, not looking at the screen, not looking at anything in particular. She thought about Lily asking, "Do you like it?" The direct, unanswerable child's question, delivered without agenda, expecting honesty in return. Most days, she'd said. She hadn't said that to another person in 4 years. She called the cabin on a Saturday morning, 11 days after the helicopter. The number was in the county directory. Ethan Cross, Creston Falls, the listing so simple. It was almost funny compared to the contact management systems she maintained for her professional network. She sat at her kitchen table with a mug of coffee and dialed it before she could redesign the decision. It rang 4 times, and she'd already begun constructing the voicemail in her head when he picked up. Cross. It's Victoria. A pause. Not surprised exactly. More like someone setting down a tool they'd been working with. How's the head? CT was clear. I'm off the ibuprofen. Good. How's the cabin? Contractor started Monday. They're faster than I expected. Another pause. Lily asks about you. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Tell her I ask about her. She'll want to know when you're coming back. I was thinking the weekend after next, she said. If that works. She'd expected more negotiation. The lack of it unsettled her in a way that was not unpleasant. I don't want to intrude on... You won't, he said. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say you didn't want to intrude on your routine or mine, and I was going to tell you that Lily will be significantly harder to live with if I tell her no. So. She smiled. She was glad he couldn't see it. All right. Drive up the day before if you can. The road's clear, but that section still needs respect in the dark. I'll drive up Friday afternoon. There's a decent motel in Creston Falls, the Ridgeline. Tell them you know Harold Briggs and they'll give you the room with the actual working heater. You're not inviting me to stay at the cabin. The north wall is a construction site. Right. She paused. Ethan. Yeah. I've been thinking about something you said, about being better in a crisis than not in one. He was quiet. I think I'm the same way, she said. I'm very good at emergencies. Quarterly crises, market downturns, hostile acquisition attempts. I know exactly what to do, and I do it well. She looked at the steam rising from her mug. The regular parts, the sitting with things parts, those are harder for me. Yeah, he said. I know. How did you get better at it? A long pause. Lily, he said finally. She needed the regular parts more than the crisis parts. I had to learn because she needed it. What if you don't have a Lily? You have to find your own reason. He said it simply, not as advice exactly, more as a fact he'd established through experience. Something that matters more than the comfortable pattern. She thought about that. What if you're not sure what matters enough? He was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then you start somewhere and see what happens, he said. She drove up the following Friday afternoon. The Ridgeline Motel was exactly what a motel in a small Colorado mountain town in the off-season should be. Clean, slightly dated, with a parking lot that was still half covered in packed snow, and a front desk clerk who did not ask why she'd mentioned Harold Briggs, but did immediately move her from the room near the ice machine to the one at the end, with the newer baseboard heater and a window facing the ridge. She called the cabin from the motel room to confirm she'd arrived. Lily picked up. You actually came, Lily said. I told you I would. I know, but... A pause that was very articulate without containing any actual words. Do you want to come for dinner tonight? Dad's making chili. It's better than the canned stuff from the storm. I know. I had the canned stuff. It was okay, but it's better when he makes it from scratch. He uses these dried peppers that Cora's mom gave him, and he won't tell anyone the ratio. Victoria was smiling again. Tell him I'll be there at 6. Dinner was louder than she expected. Lily had apparently been storing up several weeks' worth of things to tell her and released them at roughly the pace of someone who has been waiting a long time to talk to a specific person. The chili was, in fact, significantly better than the storm version. Ethan said less than either of them and managed the conversation around the table with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, refilling drinks without being asked, intercepting Lily's tendency to put her elbows on the table with a single look, following the rapid pivots of the conversation with attention that he mostly concealed. At one point, Lily, mid-story about something that had happened during a science experiment involving baking soda, looked up and found both adults watching her with expressions she apparently recognized as something other than normal listening attention, because she stopped and said, "What?" "Nothing," Ethan said. "You're both making a weird face." "No, we're not," Victoria said. "You are, though." Lily looked between them. "You're doing the face people do when they think something's nice, but they don't want to say it." Ethan looked at the table. Victoria looked at her chili. Lily, apparently satisfied that she'd accurately diagnosed the situation, went back to the baking soda story. After dinner, after Lily had been persuaded to go to bed with the argument that Victoria was going to be there all weekend and there was plenty of time, Ethan and Victoria sat on the porch with coffee. The cabin's north wall was framed in new lumber that was bright and raw against the weathered exterior of the rest of the structure. Visible progress, the shape of repair. The stars were out in the way they are at high altitude in winter, more numerous and more precise than any city sky, the kind of sky that makes you feel like you've been looking at a draft version your whole life. "She missed you," he said. "I missed her." He turned the mug in his hands. "She's not the only one," he said. He said it looking at the ridge, not at her, in the flat factual register he used for things he meant seriously enough not to dress up. Victoria didn't say anything immediately. The stars were doing what stars do, and the porch boards held the cold of the night up through the soles of her boots. And somewhere in the trees below the property, an owl said its one word twice. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about what comes next." "For the company?" "For me." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Marcus, my CFO, told me I've been filling space. He didn't say it exactly like that, but that's what he meant." She paused. "He's right." Ethan waited. "I've been considering stepping back from the CEO role," she said. "Not walking away from the company. James built it with me, and I'm not going to abandon what we built. But the day-to-day operational leadership—" She stopped. "Marcus is better at it than I am, honestly. He's been better at it for 2 years, and I've been holding on because letting go felt like losing another thing. Is that still how it feels?" She thought about it seriously. "Less," she said. "It feels less like that." He looked at her then. The porch light caught the gray at his temples, the particular lines of a face that had been used in hard weather and difficult circumstances and had not softened the way faces do when circumstances are easy. "What would you do instead?" he asked. "I don't know yet." She met his eyes. "I know where I'd like to do the figuring out." A long pause. The owl again, deeper in the trees. "Victoria," he said. The way he said names, weighted, precise, like he'd decided to use it and was committing to the decision. "I know it's complicated," she said. "I know you have Lily to think about and the life you've built here, and I'm not asking you to—" She stopped. "I'm not asking you to do anything, exactly. I'm telling you where I want to be while I figure out what comes next. And where I want to be is—" She looked at the ridge. "Here, nearby. Within driving distance of a cabin in the mountains, and a kid who thinks the ankylosaurus is the superior dinosaur." He looked at his coffee for a long moment. "You'd need to drive better in snow," he said. "I have a good teacher in mind." "Your car's totaled." "I know. I'm buying something with actual all-wheel drive." Something moved in his face. Not the guarded version, not the careful version. The real one. The one she'd seen briefly in the dark during the storm when the management had slipped for a second and she'd seen what was underneath. "I'm not easy to live near," he said. "I'm set in how I do things. I don't like surprises. I take a long time to adjust to things changing." "I'm not easy either," she said. "I have the emotional availability of someone who has been using work as a personality for 4 years. I'm impatient. I'm bad at asking for help. I will absolutely try to manage situations that aren't mine to manage." "So we're both a mess," he said. "Completely," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. The real version, not the almost smile he used for deflection, not the polite one he used with the deputy and the contractor and the people at the school. The one she'd seen exactly twice in 5 days and had been thinking about since. "There's a property for sale," he said. "About 2 miles down the access road. Old ranch house. It needs work, but the structure's solid." She looked at him. "I'm not suggesting anything," he said. "I'm just mentioning it." "Of course." "It'd need full renovation, probably a year of work." "That sounds like a project," she said. "It is. I'm good at projects." He looked at her for a moment with that steady, assessing look, the one that had, she now understood, been trained across 11 years of reading situations that required accurate assessment to survive. Reading her. "Yeah," he said. "I know you are." She held his gaze and let the silence sit between them without filling it, because she was learning, slowly, imperfectly, but actually learning, that some things are better held than resolved. That the space between two people who are deciding something important is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be respected. The stars moved their imperceptible degree. The coffee cooled. The ridge held its shape against the dark sky, the way it had held it through every storm that had ever come across it, patient and unchanged and entirely indifferent to what the people below it were deciding. Inside the cabin, Lily slept. Outside, the night was very quiet and very clear, and the distance between two people on a porch was exactly as large as they chose to make it. The ranch house 2 miles down the access road had been empty for 6 years. Victoria found this out from the owner, a retired school teacher named Dolores Hatch, who lived in Grand Junction and answered the phone on the second ring with the alert, slightly suspicious energy of a woman who had been waiting for something to happen and wasn't sure yet if this was it. They talked for 40 minutes. By the end of the conversation, Dolores had extracted Victoria's professional history, her reasons for wanting property in Creston Falls, and her general feelings about the mountains in winter. And Victoria had the sense of having been interviewed rather than having negotiated. "My husband built that house," Dolores said, near the end. "He built it the way people used to build things. To last." "I can see that from the listing photos," Victoria said. "The bones are good." "The bones are excellent," Dolores said, with the precise emphasis of someone correcting a deliberate understatement. "The roof needs replacing, and the kitchen is from 1987, and the east bathroom has a pipe situation that nobody has ever adequately explained to me. But the bones are excellent. I'd like to come see it in person." "I assume that's why you called." A pause. "You said you know Ethan Cross." "Yes." "He's a good man," Dolores said. It was not a small statement. It had weight behind it, the kind that comes from years of watching someone from a distance and arriving at a conclusion you trust. "He had a hard few years." "I know. He doesn't ask for help." "I know that too." Another pause, longer this time. "Come see the house," Dolores said. "Bring Ethan if he'll come. He'll tell you if the structure's actually sound or if I'm just a sentimental old woman." Victoria smiled. "I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive." She could hear Dolores deciding whether to be charmed by this. "No," she said finally, "I don't suppose they are." Ethan came to see the house the following Saturday. He walked the perimeter first. She watched him from the driveway, the systematic circuit he made, pressing his hand against the siding at intervals, examining the foundation exposure where the snow had pulled back from the south wall, crouching at the northeast corner to look at something she couldn't see from her angle. He was in there for a while. She waited. When he came back, he had the expression he wore when he'd completed an assessment and was organizing the results. "Roof's a full replacement," he said. "The decking underneath is soft in 2 sections, which means there's been moisture penetration, which means you need to know how far it goes before you commit to numbers." He looked at the east side of the house. The pipe situation Dolores mentioned is a cracked main supply line that someone patched with epoxy tape approximately 15 years ago and prayed about. That needs to be addressed before anything else. He paused. "The framing is exceptional. Whoever built this knew what they were doing and used real lumber. You could drive a truck into this house and the walls would still be standing." "Is that a selling point?" "In this county, in this weather, yes." She looked at the house. It was not beautiful in any obvious way. A 2-story structure with a covered porch along the front, cedar siding that had weathered to a silver gray, windows that were the original double pane from whenever Dolores's husband had last updated them. But it sat on its land with the settled, unassuming confidence of something that had been there long enough to stop announcing itself. "What do you think?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I think it's a good house," he said. "I think it's been waiting for someone to take it seriously." She looked at him sideways. "Are we still talking about the house?" The corner of his mouth. "The real one." "Buy the house, Victoria." She bought the house. The renovation took 14 months. Not because it was more complicated than they'd estimated, though it was, because renovations always are. And the pipe situation turned out to be significantly more extended than the original crack, involving a section of supply line that ran under the foundation slab and required a solution that the first plumber they hired described as creative in a tone that meant expensive. But because Victoria was learning, slowly and with difficulty, that some things should not be rushed, that there was a difference between the pace at which she was accustomed to moving and the pace at which certain things needed to happen. Ethan had told her this, not in those words. He'd set it by example, which was how he said most important things. She'd come up on weekends from Denver initially, then more frequently as Marcus settled into the operational leadership with the particular quiet competence of someone who had been waiting to be given the work and was not going to make a point of it. She kept her role at Sterling Capital, the board seat, the strategic direction, the relationships she'd built across 20 years that represented real value and were genuinely hers. But she handed the daily machinery to Marcus and watched it run and found, to her honest surprise, that it ran well. Better in some ways. Marcus had a patience with process that she'd always lacked, a willingness to let decisions breathe before committing that she'd sometimes mistaken for slowness and was actually wisdom. She told him this on a call in March, about 4 months after the transition was formalized. "You're going to make me emotional, and I don't do emotional before 9 a.m., he said. "It's 10:15. Not internally. She found a contractor in Creston Falls named Bud Waverly, who had the build of someone who had been doing physical labor since adolescence, and the particular careful intelligence of someone who had learned his trade by paying attention rather than by shortcuts. He and Ethan had known each other for years in the loose, undemonstrative way of men in small mountain towns. They'd helped each other out on projects, understood each other's standards, disagreed occasionally about approach, and resolved it without drama. Bud ran the renovation crew. Ethan consulted on structural decisions and did the electrical himself because he trusted his own work and found other people's wiring stressful. Victoria spent more weekends than she could count in work clothes she'd never have worn in Denver, doing tasks she had no prior experience with and learned as she went. She painted. She sanded floors with a machine that tried to get away from her twice before she understood how to control it. She learned to mix concrete patching compound to the right consistency, which took 3 attempts and a lecture from Bud that she appreciated more than she let on. She hung drywall badly, and then better, and eventually adequately. She was not naturally skilled at any of it, and she did not pretend to be, and nobody expected her to be, which turned out to be its own kind of freedom. Lily came on Saturdays when Ethan brought her, which was most Saturdays. She had opinions about paint colors, strong ones, delivered with the certainty of someone who has thought carefully about an aesthetic question and arrived at a conclusion, and Victoria let her choose the color for the smaller upstairs bedroom, which came out a deep particular blue that was exactly right in a way Victoria couldn't have predicted. "That's the best room in the house," Ethan said, looking at it when the paint was dry. "Lily picked it," Victoria said. He nodded. He looked at the room for a moment with an expression she'd learned to recognize. Not the operational assessment face, not the managing a situation face, but the quieter one, the one that meant he was taking something in. "She's got her mother's eye for color," he said. Margaret could walk into a room and immediately know what color it wanted to be. It was the first time he'd said something about Margaret that wasn't weighted with the specific gravity of guilt, just a fact, offered plainly, with something that was closer to gratitude than grief. "Tell me about that," Victoria said. He looked at her. "Tell me something about her," she said. "Something small, not the lost part." He was quiet for a moment, in the way that had stopped feeling like withdrawal and started feeling like how he actually processed things. "She made terrible coffee," he said, "her whole life. She genuinely thought she was making it correctly, and it was always either too weak or burned, and she'd drink it anyway and say it was fine." He paused. "I started making the coffee about 2 years into the marriage, and she never acknowledged that I had taken over, and I never brought it up." Victoria looked at the blue wall. "That's a good marriage." "Yeah," he said. "It was." She reached over and put her hand on his arm and left it there for a moment, and then took it back. He let that happen without stiffening, which was progress of a kind they'd both been tracking without discussing. They were not in a rush. This was a new thing for both of them. Two people who had run hard at their respective lives for a long time, who had made speed and relentlessness into virtues by necessity, learning to hold something gently enough that it could find its own shape. It did not come easily. There were misunderstandings. She would push at something, and he would close up, and they would go a few days in parallel without quite connecting, and then one of them would find the way back in, and they'd reestablish the thing that was building between them. There were moments when her city habits collided with his mountain ones in ways that were more friction than they expected. There were nights when she drove back to the motel after dinner at the cabin and sat in the parking lot and thought about what she was doing and whether she was doing it right and came up with no definitive answer, which she was slowly, imperfectly learning to accept. One night in October, about 10 months into the renovation, she and Ethan were sitting on the porch of the cabin after Lily was in bed. The aspens had turned. In the dark, she couldn't see the color, but she'd been watching them all week. The yellow so clean and absolute it looked painted on, and she knew they were there even in the dark, holding their color. "I want to tell you something," he said. She waited. "When Margaret died," he stopped. Started again with the deliberate care of someone navigating difficult terrain. "When she died, I told myself I was done with that, with having someone. Not because I decided it consciously, but because the thought of it was not something I could get anywhere near." He looked at the dark ridge. "And then I just kept going. You do. You get up and you make the eggs and you pack the lunch, and eventually enough time passes that the acute part is just—" He made a small gesture that meant gone without quite being gone. "It gets incorporated. It becomes part of the structure of you." She said nothing. He was going somewhere and she knew better than to cut across it. "I've been waiting," he said, "for the point where letting someone in felt like a betrayal, where it felt like I was erasing something." He turned to look at her. "It doesn't. I want you to know that. It doesn't feel like that." She held his gaze. "What does it feel like?" He thought about it with genuine seriousness. "Like there's more room than I thought," he said. "That's the best I can do." She nodded. "That's enough," she said. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand and held it without ceremony, the way you hold something you're not performing holding. And they sat there until the cold got serious enough that going inside made more sense than staying out. He proposed in February, 13 months after the helicopter had lifted her off the lower field and carried her back toward the life she'd been in the process of quietly outgrowing. It was not elaborate. He was not an elaborate man, and she was not a woman who needed elaboration, which was one of approximately 40 things about them that fit together without requiring adjustment. They were in the ranch house. The renovation was essentially complete. A few detail items remaining, the kind that always remain. A door that needed a different hinge. A section of trim she kept meaning to paint and hadn't. Things that would get done eventually. But the house was livable and lived in. Her things mixed with the furniture she'd bought over 14 months of learning what she actually wanted in a space rather than what she'd always had. It smelled like wood smoke from the fireplace she'd had Bud install in the main room, and coffee, real coffee, strong and correct, and the particular smell of a house that has been worked on by many hands and is finished now. Ethan had come over for dinner. Lily was at a sleepover at Cora's, the extended negotiation sleepover that Lily had been working toward for 3 weeks and had finally achieved, and so it was just the two of them, which still felt like a slight novelty they hadn't entirely stopped noticing. After dinner, he pushed his chair back from the table and reached into his shirt pocket and set something on the table between them. It was a ring. Simple. A narrow gold band with a single stone, not large, the setting old enough that the gold around it was slightly worn. She looked at it and then at him. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "She left it to me specifically because she said I was the one who'd know when it was right." He paused. "I think it's right." Victoria looked at the ring for a long moment. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she wasn't usually aware of it. Not fear. The other kind. The kind that means something matters. "Your grandmother sounds like she was perceptive," she said. "She was the sharpest person I've ever known." A pause. "Second sharpest." She looked up. "Victoria Sterling," he said. He said her name the way he always said it, with the full weight of someone who chose words because they meant something. "I'm not good at speeches. I don't have a list of reasons. I just know that the person I am when you're around is—" He stopped. "Better isn't the right word. More honest. More—" He looked at his hands for a moment. "Present. Like I'm actually here instead of just going through the motions of being here." She understood exactly what he meant. She'd been trying to find language for the same thing for months. "Yes," she said. He looked up. "I didn't finish." "You said enough." She reached across the table and picked up the ring. "Yes." Something moved across his face. Relief was part of it, but the larger part was something quieter and harder to name. The expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just, for the first time, set it down. He took the ring from her hand and put it on her finger. It fit. Of course it fit. Your grandmother, she said. Yeah. He cleared his throat once. She would have liked you. How do you know? She had no patience for people who weren't exactly what they appeared to be, he said, and she respected people who built things. Victoria looked at the ring on her hand. Outside, the February dark pressed against the windows, and the fire held its steady business in the main room, and the house around them was exactly as solid as Dolores Hatch's husband had intended it to be. I have something to tell you, she said. He waited. I found out last week. She met his eyes. I wasn't sure how to say it, so I've been carrying it around for 7 days trying to figure out the timing, and then you just... She stopped, the corner of her mouth. You made the timing. He was very still. We're going to need the small bedroom, she said. The room was quiet for a beat, 2, 3. She watched him process it, the precise, sequential way his mind worked through new information, always, and then watched the moment it landed, the full weight of it arriving all at once in his face. He stood up. She stood up. He put his arms around her and held on in a way that was not graceful or composed or any of the things he usually was. Just a man holding on to something that matters more than he has words for, which is sometimes the truest thing there is. Lily's going to be insufferable about being right, he said, into her hair. She laughed. About what? She told me in November that you were going to stay. He pulled back enough to see her face. She said, and I'm quoting, that it was obvious and I should just stop making it complicated. She was completely right. I know, he said. She usually is. They were married in September, when the aspens were just beginning their turn, in a meadow below the ridge that Ethan had known for 7 years and had never shown anyone until he showed it to Victoria. The ceremony was small, Lily in a dress she'd chosen herself and wore with the careful pride of someone who understood the occasion, Marcus Webb, who cried once and denied it with complete conviction, Bud Waverly, and his wife, who had known Ethan long enough to understand what this day represented, a handful of others who had been close enough to both of them to earn the distance. Dolores Hatch came down from Grand Junction and told Victoria the house looked better than she'd imagined, which was the highest compliment she had available. Lily held the rings. When they asked her to do it, she'd been quiet for a moment, the serious, processing quiet. And then she'd said, both of them? What if I drop one? And Ethan had said, then you pick it up. And she'd accepted this as a reasonable plan and practiced holding them in her palm for 3 days beforehand. She did not drop them. After the ceremony, when the small group had moved to the tables set up at the edge of the meadow, and the afternoon was doing the specific thing Colorado afternoons do in late September. The gold light, the particular quality of the air at elevation, the way the aspens catch it. Lily came and stood next to Victoria and looked out at the mountain. I have a question, she said. All right. Is it weird that I already thought of you as... She stopped, started again, more carefully. I already think of you as family. Before today, even. Is that weird? Victoria looked at her, 9 years old now. The ponytail still coming apart on one side, the same as it always did. The same eyes as her father, watching things with an attention that missed very little. No, Victoria said. That's not weird at all. Lily nodded, considered. Okay. She looked at the meadow. I'm going to go eat the good appetizers before Marcus gets all of them, because he's been hovering near that table for like 10 minutes. She went. Victoria watched her go and felt something she had no clean name for. A compound thing, made of loss and fullness, and the strange, specific tenderness of loving someone who arrived in your life through a disaster and stayed because they were supposed to be there. Ethan appeared beside her. He'd been talking to Bud, who had apparently needed to convey something about a drainage issue on the property that could not wait for a more appropriate occasion, and he had the expression of a man who has gently redirected a conversation. Bud, she said, he means well. He stood beside her and looked at the mountain and the meadow and the scattered small group of people who had showed up because they cared enough to make the drive. How are you doing? I'm good, she said. Then, because they had a years-long practice of saying the actual thing, I'm better than I've been in a long time. He put his hand on the small of her back, kept it there. The mountain did not change and the light did not stop moving across it, and the aspens held their yellow in the afternoon the way they held it every year, patient and absolute and entirely indifferent to the significance of the particular day, which somehow made the day feel more real rather than less. The baby came in late April, during a week of rain that turned the access road to mud, and made Ethan drive to the hospital in Glenwood Springs with the focused, unhurried speed of a man who has calculated exactly how much time he has and is using all of it correctly. They named her Clara. She arrived in the world with the slightly put-upon expression of someone who had been somewhere comfortable and had opinions about being relocated, and then she looked at the light from the window beside the hospital bed, and her expression shifted into something more open, more curious, and Victoria thought, holding this small, specific, entirely new person, that this was it. This was the thing she had been in the vicinity of for her entire professional life without ever quite arriving at it. Not an achievement, not an outcome. Just this. Ethan held Clara for a long time without talking. He stood by the window with her and she watched his face cycle through things she recognized. The operational calm, the assessment, and then beneath both of those, the other thing, the thing that Lily had gotten and this new person would get, the fierce and unglamorous love of a man who had been through enough to know exactly what he was holding. "She's going to be trouble," he said finally. "Yes," Victoria agreed. "She's already got an opinion about something. She gets that from both of us." He looked at her across the room with Clara in his arms, and the April rain on the window and the mess of the hospital room around them. And the look on his face was not the composed one, not the careful one. It was the one she'd seen in a fire-lit, damaged cabin in February of the previous year, the one that had been under all the other ones all along. "Yeah," he said, "she probably does." "What, The winter that came 2 years after the wedding brought real snow again. Not the historic catastrophe of that first storm, but serious accumulation, the kind that changes the mountain's character for weeks. Ethan cleared the access road in the early morning with the equipment he kept maintained for exactly this purpose, and Victoria made coffee, strong, correct, the way she'd learned it. And Clara slept in the next room with the total commitment of an 18-month-old who has decided that 6 a.m. is not a reasonable hour. Lily was 14 now. She was doing a thing that teenagers do where they oscillate between needing you completely and needing you not at all, sometimes within the same hour. And navigating it required a patience and a fluency with contradiction that Victoria was still developing. But the previous evening, Lily had sat across the kitchen table from her with a homework assignment about persuasive writing and asked Victoria to read her draft and tell her honestly if it was good, and Victoria had read it and told her honestly that the argument was strong and the structure was loose, and here was why, and Lily had listened with the same serious attention she'd always had and said, "Okay, that's helpful," without defensiveness. And Victoria had thought, not for the first time, that this child was going to be formidable, that the world was going to have to accommodate her eventually, because she was not going to be the one who accommodated. Ethan came in from the clearing work and hung his coat and stood at the counter and took the coffee she handed him and drank half of it before saying anything. "South section's clear," he said. "The road's passable." "Clara's still asleep." "Good." He looked at her. "How long do you think we have?" "Maybe 20 minutes. I'll take it." He sat down at the kitchen table with his coffee, and she sat across from him, and they had 20 minutes of quiet in which nothing particularly significant happened. He read something on his phone. She thought through a call she needed to make later. The snow came down outside in the steady, purposeful way of snow that intends to stay. And it was exactly as unremarkable as most mornings are, and exactly as irreplaceable. She had thought for a long time that what she was looking for was the extraordinary, the version of a life that justified the effort. She had chased it through 2 decades of building a company, and it had delivered extraordinary things, real things, things she was proud of, things she and James had made from nothing that had genuinely mattered to the people who worked there and the companies they'd helped build. She did not regret any of it. But she had mistaken the extraordinary for the whole picture, had thought that if the peak experiences were high enough, the daily ordinary texture of a life would sort itself out or wouldn't matter much. She'd been wrong about that. It was the most important thing she'd been wrong about, and she'd needed a blizzard and a car crash and a collapsing roof and a man who didn't lie about what he was to understand it. The ordinary texture was the whole thing. The coffee at 6 in the morning, the road cleared before you asked, the child doing homework at the kitchen table. The new small person sleeping in the next room who had your eyes and her father's temperament, and an opinion about everything already at 18 months. The specific weight of a ring on your hand that had been on someone else's hand before, carrying a history you were now part of. That was it. That was the whole thing. From the hallway came the sound of Clara waking up. The preliminary sounds. The shift from sleep to consciousness that always happened in stages with her. A small sound, then a pause. Then the more insistent one that meant she'd committed to being awake and expected someone to acknowledge it. Ethan put down his coffee. "I've got her," Victoria said. "You sure? Go finish the south section." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd stopped trying to fully read because some things didn't need to be read, they just needed to be received. He picked up his coffee, drained it, set the mug in the sink, and went back out into the snow. She went down the hall to Clara. The small person was standing at the crib rail in the particular morning posture of a toddler, slightly indignant, absolutely certain that the world had been slow to respond. And when she saw Victoria, she said, "Mama," with the complete, uncomplicated directness of a person who knows exactly what they need and is not embarrassed to say so. Victoria picked her up, held her the way you hold something small and warm and entirely dependent on you, which is with both arms and your whole attention and nothing held back. Outside, the snow kept coming. The mountain absorbed it the way it absorbed everything, without drama, without complaint, the way things absorb what they were built to carry. Ethan's truck moved along the access road, clearing the path the way he'd cleared paths for years, in places that were harder and higher stakes than this one, for people who needed it more urgently than this. Though none of it had ever mattered more than the ordinary maintenance of keeping this particular road open for the people at the end of it. He had told her once that he was better in a crisis than outside one. He'd been wrong about that too, or at least less right than he'd thought. What he was good at was showing up. In the crisis and before it and after it and in all the mornings between, with the same steadiness, the same economy of motion, the same attention to what the situation actually required rather than what would look good. That was not a crisis skill. That was a life skill. He'd had it the whole time and hadn't known what to call it. Neither had she, until she watched him use it every day for 2 years. Some things you can only learn by staying somewhere long enough to see them clearly. You have to stop moving through experience at speed and let it actually arrive. Victoria Sterling, who had built a company in 20 years and driven into a mountain blizzard because she could not tolerate slowing down, had needed a collision to understand this. She would not recommend the method, but she was not sorry for where it brought her. Clara had gone back to sleep on her shoulder, the boneless, absolute sleep of the very young. And Victoria stood in the small bedroom with the blue walls that Lily had chosen and held her daughter and listened to the snow and the distant sound of the truck and the specific quiet of a house that is full without being loud. The mountain was right outside. It had been there before any of them arrived and would be there long after, unchanged by what had happened on its slopes. The crash, the rescue, the 2 strangers in a damaged cabin, deciding slowly and imperfectly to trust each other with the thing you can only trust another person with when you've run out of reasons not to. Ethan Cross had spent 11 years being sent into the worst situations the world could produce and coming back from them with everything intact except the part of him that believed ordinary life was enough. It had taken him years after the teams, and a wife who understood him better than he understood himself, and a daughter who inherited her mother's patience and his attention, and finally one more emergency on a mountain highway. One more stranger who needed help, one more set of impossible conditions, one more application of training that was never supposed to be used for anything this personal. To understand that the ordinary life was not a consolation prize. It was the mission. It had always been the mission. He just hadn't had the right people to come home to. He did now.